This is the best of First and Last, the podcast, with Mike Golic Jr. and Robin Lundberg.
My take is that it was a great weekend of the NBA playoffs, really top to bottom. I mean, the playoffs have been good enough where the Grizzlies and Spurs gave us an all-time classic game on Saturday.
The Grizzlies and Spurs produced maybe the best game of the playoffs, and a team from Milwaukee has actually captivated the attention of people around the league and people that are more casual NBA fans. So you always talk about the strength of the NBA and the stars. I'll say that's the strength of the NBA, that you could make me care about a team from Milwaukee.
You know what it really does is not that the complaints or the content isn't valid or things that they have to address, but it makes the magnitude of the crying at the end of the regular season seem really petty. Because isn't like the playoffs what we're supposed to build toward in any sport? And we're here, and they've been great. So it feels like, the last 2 or 3 weeks of the regular season, all of the rest or, whatever it was, it doesn't mean anything. All right, this is what we're here for, right? This is why we came to play.
It is. We need something to complain about at all times. That's pretty well documented with where we are at as a people at this point. But I'd also say to that end, if you were looking for the people complaining on that side, you are getting all this great stuff now, but more and more because of how good this is it does make the regular season kind of feel like a waste of time, the large portion of it. I know both of us have agreed that the NBA regular season is much too long, but this really speaks to that end, that you get here and now all of a sudden we get these really compelling games because everyone has clearly ratcheted it up. Everyone's doing and performing things at the playoff level that really you don't see nearly as often, especially from the top-tier teams in the regular season.
We'll make that Straight Talk brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, half the cost. Of course, you heard the highlights at the beginning. The Celtics tie up their series with the Bulls, 2 games apiece. Straight Talk Wireless, nationwide coverage on America's largest and most dependable networks. That was one of the results from yesterday. We'll get to all the action over the weekend. But I suppose that would render your Bulls sweep prediction untrue.
Yeah, looking a little less solid right now on that end. I might have to give that one up. It doesn't look like the Bulls are going to sweep at this point. But you know what they say, it's not a series until someone loses at home. Well, now it's not a series because both teams have dropped 2 at home.
It's crazy, really, if you look at this playoffs, because some of the names that are having big impacts, Nene in the Houston series, ISO Joe last night for Utah, who's been great for Utah. He's their go-to scorer down the stretch. People forget the ISO Joe nickname came about because Atlanta was too predictable at end of games, always going to isolation. So it wasn't said in a complimentary fashion. Now it's become like a very big compliment because the late career renaissance of Joe Johnson is this killer in clutch time.
Well, and ISO Joe also became evolved a little bit. Like we saw ISO Joe, the facilitator, last night using all the attention that he got to kick to wide open looks for some of his teammates, which felt a little wrong as a crowd that was waiting for him to just force his will on 3 guys, but it was really effective.
Another name from around that same time period, Rondo. Rondo swings a series for the Celtics used to mean something else. And now it does seem like there is a bit of correlation between Rondo going down and the Celtics seizing command of this series. I would say it's twofold. I would say part of it is Rondo going down, not because he's a great player anymore. Obviously, he's not a great player anymore, but he can still tap into some of that. But what he is somebody who knows what he's doing out on the court and gets the team into their sets. Jaren Grant only played 5 minutes last night. He's really struggled as a starter. He doesn't have the experience. Michael Carter-Williams is not good. They don't have that personnel on Chicago, so he helped steady the ship. So between that and the Celtics starting to play up to their level, the Celtics played poorly in Games 1 and Games 2. The combination of those two things has made this a much closer series, obviously.
Yeah, it's now it starts to be like talking about the Patriots Super Bowl. Do the Patriots win it or did Atlanta choke it away? Is Boston playing that much better? Or are the Bulls really feeling that loss? Because I'm with you. You can see it, and they pointed it out in the broadcast where these young point guards that have been asked to come in and replace Rondo are deferring over to Fred Hoiberg a little more and looking over to the sideline for sets and what they need as far as direction on the court. And that can have a serious ripple effect on down the line when you just don't have someone who's at very steady command of what you're trying to do and can also be a party starter for you. I know they've got Jimmy Butler who can get his own shot, but Rajon Rondo still had that party starter mentality to him where he could get inside and create opportunities for everyone else because he had that understanding and still had some of that ability.
Well, Grant and Carter Williams combined for 0 points. I mean, their minutes were limited because they weren't playing well. And Isaiah Cannon came in and actually did play well, so we'll see what they do the rest of the series. But Fred Hoiberg, the big complaint was after the game about the carrying, he said, basically what Isaiah Thomas is doing during the game, saying he is impossible to guard because he's putting his hand underneath the ball on every possession.
Man, let me tell you what. Fred, really respect the attempt. I think a lot of fans out there, a lot of NBA casual fans that are always travel guy, there's too much traveling in this league that goes uncalled. They're going to be shaking their fists and rah-rahing with you. But listen, we all know that he said he's been talking about this to the referees for 4 games now. And I got news for you. If you are alerting the referees before the game that this is going on, because that's something coaches do all the time. They go into the game and they understand the tendencies of what the other team tries to get away with, and they go up to the refs and say, listen, this is what we need you to look out for, like they've been doing this especially the last few games. If you're doing all that and the referees are still not calling anything in your favor, you may be on the wrong side of this.
Here's what Hoiberg had to say.
Isaiah Thomas is a hell of a player, an unbelievable competitor. He's a warrior, everything he's going through right now. He had a hell of a game tonight. But when you're allowed to discontinue your dribble on every possession, he is impossible to guard. He's impossible to guard when you're able to put your hand underneath the ball and take 2 or 3 steps and put it back down. It's impossible to guard him in those situations.
Well, you know, if Hoiberg really wants to complain about this, because I actually think there is at least some validity, a sliver of validity, he needs to get in a hot tub time machine and go back to the beginning of the century and start calling it on Allen Iverson. Because that's where it really started with it. You know, Allen Iverson famously with those kind of moves. You know, the one he put on Jordan, he was the guy who put his hand on the ball all the time. And it's now just, you know, it's better that is let go, by the way. It makes the product more exciting. It gives more guys falling down on the court and us going, ooh, you know, like all that stuff. It's better. So Hoiberg, if there's something he really needs to worry about, it's his lineups. The ones where he puts like Paul Zipster and Cristiano Feliciano and Joffrey Laverne and Michael Carter-Williams on the court at the same time. Stop doing that, and don't worry about Isaiah Thomas's ball handling.
Yeah, you got to worry about those what in the hell lineups you just mentioned, because half those names I just went, what in the hell?
Exactly, and that's what you're seeing as they're out on the court, and Bulls fans are probably saying the same thing as the lead is going away.
First and last, the podcast.
Isaiah Thomas's reaction to Fred Hoiberg saying he carries the ball on every play. Here it was.
I mean, that's not the reason why I'm an impossible cover, but I mean, it is what it is. It's not that funny, but I don't know. I mean, I guess he's gonna just keep saying it, but I mean, I've been dribbling that way my whole life, so I mean, I don't know what to say to that.
Good answer to have a laugh track for.
Yeah, definitely the right one up there, playing it very well in that moment. Because, listen, no one is going to side with Fred Hoiberg seriously on this one, other than maybe super, super old-time sports writer guy that's somewhere out there waiting.
Phil Jackson might. I mean, he's sending emails about reverse pivots to the Knicks players.
God, this would be a great time for a Phil Jackson tweet. It's been few too many days gone without hearing something about the Knicks train wreck. This would be a great time to inject himself back in.
Just get mad about 3-pointers and carries and the like.
I tell you. But it's got to be as cryptic as possible. Like, I'm trying to figure out what way he could go about this, what emojis Phil could insert in the situation, because that was a new one for him last time around, as far as the Twitter shade was throwing emojis into it. So we know he's become self-aware and discovered that now.
And all Knicks fans with a giant sad face emoji as normal. Meanwhile, Jimmy Butler, after the game, had this to say about Marcus Smart of the Boston Celtics.
As far as the Marcus Smart situation goes, he's a great actor, acting tough. That's what he does, but I don't think he's about that, and I just don't think I'm the wrong guy to get in my face. So he need to take it somewhere else, because I'm not the one for that.
Man, that's a weird thing that comes up in a lot of sports, especially we were talking about before the show, the sports where there's high testosterone and a lot a lot of physicality involved in the sports, of basketball, football, the like in there. The notion of being about that life or not. And I feel like we need to have an appropriate grading system for if someone is or is not about that life, because Marcus Smart can make the claim that he's already shown he's about that life. I mean, back in college, he went in the stands and was shoving fans at Texas Tech, so clearly he's demonstrated some degree of that, but Jimmy Butler not really feeling that history.
Yeah, I want to be in a situation now where I can tell someone else they're not about that life. I've never really been in that situation. I have to figure out who would be the person I would tell that to.
Well, that's
and
the
what
thing.
That situation would be. But I want to say, you're not about that life, son.
Because those are the two things you have to be secure of, because I've always said everyone in sports, and this is why Marcus Smart is clearly open to this criticism, because there's a camp that's definitely about that life that everyone knows in the world of sports. Like, there's just guys you look out there and everyone acknowledges that, like, all right, he's really
Steven Jackson you're picturing in your head.
Exactly. That's the one that readily comes to mind.
Matt Barnes.
Yeah, all those guys that will actually drive 90 miles to whoop something.
Yeah.
And are actually going to do it, are actually the tough guys that you don't want to step to. But for everyone else, it's that gray area of doing it in the exact arena that Jimmy Butler just did, because these guys aren't going to fight on national TV in one of these games, and they're not going to meet by the tour bus. They're not going to meet by the team buses after the game. Shouts to Carmelo Anthony. So he knows it's a safe space to explore these feelings.
That's when Carmelo and Lala's love was still pure, by the way. But when we're talking about this situation, I would say three things to what Jimmy Butler had to say. Number one, it shows you Marcus Smart is doing his role well, playing his role well, because part of his role on that team is sort of irritant. He's the defender, the irritant, the hustle guy. He's the kind of guy who can go 2 of 7 from the floor for 5 points, but be +9, as he was yesterday. 8 rebounds and 6 assists he provided. Number two, if you look up Marcus Smart's upbringing, I don't know if he's not about that life. And number three, I get the actor factor that Jimmy Butler's bringing in, and I wonder if Smart's flopping plays into that, because Marcus Smart might be the number one flopper in the NBA. Like, when you talk about the degree of flop, you ever seen The Rock sell a Stone Cold Stunner?
Oh, yeah.
That's Marcus Smart every time he's trying to take a charge.
Listen, that's unfortunately emblematic of, I think, where we are today. I mean, we talked about James Harden's game last week and how he's basically the Greek god of getting to the free throw line, and part of that is being able to sell certain portions of that. But I'm sure that's a fact. I'm sure that's absolutely a factor in a lot of this. And you're right, though. There's part of me that wants to say to Jimmy Butler, like, man, you're the best player on your team. You can't acknowledge that this is affecting you, because it just gives credence to a guy whose only job is basically to do this. But, man, there's another part of me that just loves a little bit of petty injected in all this. And that's one thing this series is starting to show us, is it's got a little bit of that petty, because this wasn't the only incident last night. You had Isaiah Thomas getting in Michael Carter-Williams' face. You had, Jay Crowder and Robin Lopez in the shoe tying incident.
By the way, Fred Hoiberg would also need to explain this to me. Game 1, Robin Lopez, 34 minutes. Game 2, Robin Lopez, 32 minutes. Game 3, Robin Lopez, 21 minutes. Game 4, Robin Lopez, 22 minutes.
Going to go out on a limb and say you probably need to recognize, I feel like every team in the playoff has sort of demonstrated that they've got that one guy, that one role player that clearly has injected something into the lineup that was missing there before. Like, when we talk Cavaliers, for me, that guy so far has been Iman Shumpert. Like, the difference for them defensively when he's come back into the lineup versus what they had before is substantial. And you could argue that Robin Lopez has been that guy for the Bulls this entire series.
Is there going to be the takes today that it was a weak sweep by the Cavaliers?
Oh, yeah, it's coming like a freight train, Robin.
a blackjack of first-round wins for LeBron, now 21 straight first-round wins. A couple things from that, since you brought it up, that I noticed. One, you said Shumpert has been playing better, and that's a big thing for them, because he'd been pretty dreadful all season, and he's now playing consistent minutes. And Ty Lue has added that wrinkle where he's playing the 4 shooters. If you count Shumpert as a shooter, he's the weakest shooter of the bunch. But basically that bench unit with LeBron, and it's been very effective. It's Channing Frye, Darren Williams, Kyle Korver, and Shumpert with LeBron, because he's unguardable. When you spread the floor with those 4 guys and give him that much space, they cannot keep him from getting to the basket. They actually gave up the lead when Love and Kyrie came back into the game. Kyrie really hijacked the offense a little bit yesterday. Of course, they wind up winning the game. LeBron hits the go-ahead three, makes the defensive stop, and you know, I don't. Today's not a LeBron show, but I will get his stat line out there just for everybody's consumption for the first round of the playoffs. 33 points, 10 boards, 9 assists, 3 steals, 2 blocks per game on 54% shooting and 45% from 3.
It's pretty good. It's a new high score. I think he broke the game. But to your point about it being a quote-unquote weak sweep for a lot of people, Dave McMenamin wrote up a piece last night. The Cavs' 16 combined points. They won by 16 combined points, tied with the 75 Golden State team that swept Washington in the finals, the smallest margin of victory in a 4-game sweep ever. 100-plus points allowed in each game made them the first since the 95 Rockets to allow the century mark in all 4 wins of a sweep. So statistically, it may match up to that. But we also understand that this is a Cavs team that kind of uses this space as a tune-up, and when you're able to do that and still tune everything up from the spot they did, winning each time, it's a unique perspective that very few get afforded.
Let me ask you this question, then. Do you feel better or worse about the Cavs after that series?
I feel way better, especially bringing up Shumpert, just the effort that we saw from them defensively, and maybe it didn't translate fully into points there, or into the points allowed metric the way we wanted to see, but just seeing the actual mechanics of them working on defense, seeing the way they can touch that ceiling the way we kind of wanted them to towards the end of the regular season was really encouraging.
First and last.
You know, before we get to the Russell Westbrook aspect of that game, very good game yesterday between the Rockets and the Thunder. A little bit of the free throw component coming into it late. Mike D'Antoni has been known, Mike, as a better basketball, let's say, philosopher than strategist historically, and I think his in-game coaching has been on point in this series. But that's the kind of win, if you're the Rockets and you're looking to truly contend, that teams like that get, right? Harden struggled, 5 of 16 from the floor, only scored 16 points. To see him score the same number of points as shot attempted is pretty rare. Patrick Beverley struggled from the floor. Just not a great game from Houston, but they figured out how to win that one down the stretch, and that's the kind of game those sort of teams win.
Well, yeah, and they're putting that stamp on the series. We said going into this after Game 1, and Oklahoma City ended up coming out and stealing 1, but that in general, Houston's just a much better team, and despite the matchup of the MVPs that we kind of hyped up and looked forward to, this was still a pretty big disparity in the quality of the team put on the court, and we really saw that for Oklahoma City in the waning moments of this game.
Now, Russell Westbrook, he goes for another triple-double. He's the second player in NBA postseason history with 3 straight triple-doubles, the first player in NBA postseason history with 3 straight triple-doubles in a single series. It wasn't enough for the Thunder yesterday, and he had enough on the podium.
Second time in 3 games, you guys really struggled when Russell went to the bench. You were out there for part of that. What goes on when he goes to the bench? Why is Houston so successful? And do you sense that they sort of get an energy boost just from him going out of the game?
Hold on, Steven. I don't want nobody to try to split us up. We all one team. Regardless if I go to the bench, if Steven's on the floor, if I'm off the floor, we in this together. Don't split us up. Don't try to split us up. Don't try to make us go against each other. Try to make it against Russell and the rest of the guys. Russell against Houston. I don't want to hear that. We in this together. We playing as a team, and that's all that matters. That's it.
Yeah, Russell, I'm not trying to split you up, but twice in 3 games, you guys have not played well at all when you've gone to the bench.
That's fine.
I'm just trying to figure out what's going on.
Russell, you ain't played well at all. Say Russell and the team haven't played well. Don't say when Russell goes out, the team don't play well. It don't matter. We in this together.
That may be, Russell, but I asked Steven a question. And it's a legitimate question.
You. Next question.
It's a legitimate question.
Next question. Next question.
Well,
next question.
No, I think we're going to keep the microphone. I had a question for Steven, and it wasn't answered. And I don't understand. If Steven wants to say he still hadn't said anything, if he wants to say I don't want to answer that, fine. But
next question, please.
Man, nothing like a good awkward camera flash in the background. Hearing that the camera lens shutter in the background during that what felt like an incredibly long silence right there before it. Solid little clapback by the reporter too, not being willing to be done, but Man, I mean, what is Russ doing up there?
That fits his character, right? It comes across even better in the audio form when the southern accent plays in with that kind of irritation as well. He's right. It's a legitimate question given the context, the way this series has developed. I want to stand up for the other Thunder players for a second because they get talked about like they're scrubs, and they are not. Like, those are good players. A lot of those guys are good players. They won Game 3 for them. And if you look at their front court, check out their combined salaries, right? I mean, they're not getting paid for no reason. Steven Adams is a darn good player. Taj Gibson's a darn good player. Andre Robertson is a really good defender. You saw what he did to Harden. Oladipo is a nice player as well. Like, those guys are bona fide NBA players who add value, are winning players. The problem with Russ off the floor is he's the one guy who creates for that team. You know, when I criticized his shot selection, I think it was, Game 2? After Game 2, people said, well, look what happened when he goes to the bench. I never said they don't need him on the floor. It's just when he's on the floor doesn't mean he needs to take every shot. And what the Thunder are missing is, first of all, their bench is terrible. And second of all, they could use one more playmaker and they could use some shooting. And here's the elephant in the room. It's Kevin Durant, right? This is a championship-level team that lost Kevin Durant. So I just kind of take a little offense at the notion that these other guys are scrubs and they get totally diminished when they are part of a winning core. They're just not the guys. They're not the, big threes that we mention on these kind of teams. And that's really the root of the issue is Russell Westbrook's alone now because they did have Kevin Durant and now they do not. It would actually be much more interesting if when he came back from injury, he went back to the Thunder.
It would be. It'd be a hell of a way if we could make playoff trades at this point because that could really turn things on its head. But the one thing I will say is while they are all competent NBA players, it looked like he was awfully lonely in the waning moments of that game last night. And I know we were coming off a fourth quarter of the game before where we really took Russ to task for taking 18 shots in the fourth quarter and trying to do a little bit too much with the hero ball. But last night I was watching the end of that game and it kind of felt like, all right, well, that's why. Because there was no one else that was capable of getting open and getting off a shot in those moments. It seemed like it was just trying however they could to get Russ the ball because he was the only one that anyone else had confidence in that moment because it certainly looked like everyone else was afraid in that moment.
Well, he's the only one that could create his own shot. Robertson's struggles from the free throw line really affected that game as well. But you look at the overall shooting percentages throughout the game. Again, Game 3, the supporting cast won that game for them. And in this game, Russ was 10 of 28. The team was 42 of 85. So he shot 35% from the floor, and the team as a whole shot about 50% from the floor. So it's not like they're missing every shot that they're taking out there. They were at 7 of 19 from 3, which is fine. So they're not just bricking everything that's taking place, and they're good defensive players. I just don't. It's not like he is playing with just some terrible, laughable roster. Again, it's just they are a shooter or two and another playmaker away from being a championship level team, and that's what happens. I mean, I've heard Greeny and your dad talk about this a lot. The ramifications of losing a Kevin Durant, a player of that ilk, are supposed to be significant and huge. And it was one of the arguments for Russell Westbrook winning the MVP, that the Thunder that were still pretty good and still in the playoff mix, and of course, what he did individually. Well, you're seeing it now when you get into the play. This was a team that was up 3-1 on the 73-win Warriors a year ago. So that's the quality of the basketball team. Yeah, they lost Ibaka also, but they gained Gibson and Oladipo, so we'll call that at least a wash. That's what this team was, a championship level team, and now they don't have Kevin Durant, so they're just a good team.
They were built with that in mind too, like bringing Victor Oladipo over. Those were moves designed to try and continue to woo Kevin Durant back into the fold in Oklahoma City that didn't work. So all of a sudden you make those roster moves with him in mind and he leaves, then what are you left with? It makes your roster a bit flawed in that regard to where, yeah, you can have good players, but you were built around these two guys as the sun and moon, and now you lose one of those bodies, and it completely affects the way that you go here, and it puts you in a position where you understand, because the way you feel right now is exactly what Russ was trying to guard against up on the podium on there. It was just a really poor entry point for it because the reporter was asking a completely reasonable question about how this team looks and differs when Russ is off the court. It's not an attempt of splitting someone up. It's looking at a situation that existed within the body of the game. So you can question Russ's understanding of the nature of splitting someone up, but his ultimate end was exactly the rant you just went on.
There's a lot of players where that happens with, by the way. It's not just Russell Westbrook. It's been LeBron this year. It's Steph Curry at times with the Warriors and Draymond Green. I'd have to look at the numbers this year, but it was last year to a certain extent. Chris Paul, huge deal with the Clippers when he's off the floor. What's interesting is, for all the MVP talk, it hasn't been as precipitous a drop for Houston with Harden, both in this series and over the course of the regular season. I don't know. I know all the votes are already cast, but that's just an interesting wrinkle that their fall off hasn't been quite the same as some of the other teams' fall offs when you remove their top dog superstars.
Yeah, it's interesting. And to that end, speaking of Harden and Russ, I've got an interesting, whenever we get around to talking about the Clippers and the Jazz and that game from last night, an interesting way they all relate to Chris Paul, just because I know Chris Paul is a guy that you've talked about very glowingly a lot, but has very noted postseason struggles as it relates to those other two.
Yeah, well, he has noted postseason struggles in where he winds up. Individually, his numbers are pretty darn stellar. They're real plus-minus leaders this year: Chris Paul, LeBron James, Jimmy Butler, Steph Curry. I'm trying to get to Russ. Russ was number 9 in the NBA in real plus-minus this year.
First and last.
It's funny with something like the NFL Draft, which is undoubtedly a big event, but sometimes like the coverage starts maybe a little bit earlier than necessary for where everybody's interest level actually is, or the level of thoughts most people have. And then all of a sudden you get to that point where it's like, oh wait, it's today's kind of that day. It's that turnover day where it's like, all right, it is almost NFL draft mode, where it should be the bulk of a lot of the conversation.
Yeah, this is moving day for draft week, where it all starts to crystallize and become real. We know the teams will be on the clock Thursday, starting with that first round. They moved that to its own separate day, and the one pick that seems to be talked about as much as anything, that for a while seemed like such a lock, and then we injected some doubt from a couple of different sides into this, that number 1 overall pick, and Myles Garrett finding his way back into the news again.
What's the latest news on that?
So this time around, it's another former NFL defensive lineman coming out to lob some criticism the way of Myles Garrett. Before, it was our own Booger McFarland, who had just stated his opinion and what he believed on Myles Garrett, and it resulted in a little bit of beef, not so much beef, when Myles refused to come on Mike and Mike because Booger was there. Now Warren Sapp coming out and saying, really echoing the sentiment. His quote was, "I don't see it from this kid. I see splash plays. Everybody gets those. Where's the game he took over? Any D lineman who's the number 1 pick, you turn on and you say, there it is. This kid, no, I don't. I'm a pretty plain and frank guy. I watch the tape and he disappears. I watch the tape and he absolutely disappears." And I think one of his quote was, he's a lazy player who makes about 4 plays a game. And so, I mean, face value there. Is there any credence that you're giving this, or does the source dismiss it enough for you to just throw this away?
Here's the thing. I mean, Warren Sapp is a great player, right? So he should know something about playing that position, but what you said is mostly true. It's hard for me to take anything he says seriously. Like, given the overall context of his personal/professional life and the things that have come out of his mouth, the source almost renders the point moot.
Yeah, and that's the way I definitely felt about this initially. I mean, with as outspoken as Myles Garrett was about his situation with Booger, this is a much easier clapback because there is much more to go at with Warren Sapp and his transgressions post-playing career than anything else. But the more I got to thinking about it, it starts to add up to where, in addition to Warren Sapp and Booger, there have been a few other former NFL defensive linemen who have come out and kind of echoed similar sentiments. And so it starts to get to the point where it's like, all right, all these guys can't just be making this up. Like, this can't come. I know he accused Booger of bias and these different things, and we can downgrade Warren Sapp because of what he's done personally. But at some point, and just in watching him on my own, there is a lot of truth to certain aspects of this. Like you mentioned upside before, this is a big upside gamble with Myles Garrett. You're basically saying the ceiling isn't the roof with this guy. Like, there's an otherworldly ceiling in the way that Jonathan Allen, probably a more complete prospect at this point. Even a guy like Derek Barnett, probably a little more of a known commodity at this point. With Myles Garrett, you have a guy that notably seems to turn it on and off at certain points of the game.
Well, then don't take him at number one. Where's this consensus that he's number one? If everybody in the world is now like, you know what, he's only good on film. He can't even play football at all. He's super lazy. Like, why take him at number one?
Well, the problem is that part of the NFL draft process is trying to project forward. That's why they take into account all the measurables. That's why it's not as simple as Deshaun Watson's the number one overall quarterback because he was the best in college. It's figuring out what skill set translates to the NFL, so you can kind of understand people falling in love with all of the Myles Garrett measurables that have come into play since the season ended.
Mary Kay Cabot, I believe, is the name. She is a beat writer for Cleveland.com. She tweeted that Mitch Trubisky is still a serious candidate for the Browns at number one, despite Garrett vibes at presser, sources say.
Yeah, that's the other interesting part of this is it's still that organization really trying to figure out what they want to do at this spot, because I don't believe that they're sold because the position of quarterback is such a need spot. And so it's trying to prioritize that going into this draft and really figure out for them if the upside is there. Because, listen, when you think about what Warren Sapp really lobbed at him as criticism too, if you get a defensive lineman that can make 4 plays a game that are behind the line of scrimmage and one of those is a sack, you're an all-pro. Like, you're probably going on towards a Hall of Fame career. So I don't always see that as a criticism, and that's what everyone wants to talk about what he's done against the run. And it's worth noting that the season he was healthy in 2015, he was 7th in the NCAA in tackles for loss, so he's got some value there. But this is a guy who has effort questions, and I don't want to make this about people will say he's got other interests, so NFL teams are afraid of that. No, you can have other interests, and if you're still a beast, it won't matter. But when you're as hot and cold as he is, you wonder, will throwing those large sums of money at him make enough of that difference to increase that effort?
By the way, her name is Mary Kay Cabot. I was going French. French elections are coming up. Rudy Gobert returned last night. So, imagine if his name was Rudy Gobert.
Yeah, listen, coming off the NBA playoffs, it's noteworthy with the amount of international players that we've got there. You fall into that. Giannis and Gobert are the names that we're used to saying, so it just rolls off the tongue a little sweeter.
NFL draft coming up this week. There will be plenty of analysis on that on Mike and Mike. Of course, today they've got Charles Barkley and Tyronn Lue to go over the NBA playoff weekend. The Jazz and Rudy Gobert in his return beat the Clippers last night behind a huge performance from ISO Joe Johnson. Joe Johnson, 12 of 17 from the floor with 28 points. Huge performances to go around this weekend, including one I think we need to get in the show at some point. It happened Saturday, so it's a little further away. It's not the series of note, but it's now 2-2, and that game between the Spurs and the Grizzlies on Saturday was an instant classic.
I was out with a group of friends that night, and that stopped everyone in their tracks. Like we all sat down, took notice, and watched the end of a game between two teams that before we shuffled off to the side pretty early on and said, even the Spurs, for being multiple-time champions, aren't a compelling enough draw aesthetically to make us stop and take notice of the series.
Kawhi Leonard is an assassin. That guy is so good. If he were, if I were to nitpick to the craziest degree, the one thing he doesn't really do that well is play make. Like, he's not, the one weakness might be passing. He doesn't really set up other guys that way. He's not selfish. But yes, because he didn't dribble that well early in his career. Now he dribbles. The fact that he shoots the ball the way he does is just deadly. When you combine that with the defensive prowess and everything, and he is cold-blooded, boy. Shout out to the Rick James, Dave Chappelle sketch, RIP, Charlie Murphy and everything. Those threes at the end of that game, man, he is a machine. Like David Fisdale, your boy, put it.
By the way, shout out to David Fisdale, the guy, one of the biggest probably the biggest rising star in this playoff run that we've seen. I'd say between him and Giannis, those have been the two biggest stock-up components of this playoff run. But you're right, Kawhi might be in third for that, because as known a commodity as we like to leave Kawhi in a box. We like to say, we'll give him some MVP consideration, but defensive player of the year, best two-way player, all this stuff that's easy to just compartmentalize him and put it off to the side. Take Kawhi out of the box, man. He's fresh and new.
Yeah, I throw John Wall in that mix as well, but here's how good Kawhi Leonard is. Pop lets him just go ISO at the end of games. Like, the Spurs go away from Spursian things that traditionally they've done in the past, and it's like, give Kawhi Leonard the basketball. You know who he kind of reminds me of? And he was tweeting about it after the game. In some situations, the way he plays offense, Kobe.
He seems to have a little bit at him, and then despite that, he's still getting left wide open for game-tying threes.
And we didn't mention Mike Conley Jr., who might have even had a better game in the win for the Grizzlies, by the way.
Payday.
First and last, the podcast.
Winerline guy tweets in, full disclosure, my birth name is Hockey Guy, but I am from Buffalo, hence the name change. All right, Hockey Guy, it's your time of the show. KMOX 630 CHED, ESPN New York 98.7, TSN 1200, and Capitals 24/7 bring you this.
This one's for you, Hockey Guy.
Comes into the middle. Saboka centers. They score! The St. Louis Blues have scored. Magnus Payarvi sends the Blues into the next round, and they'll have a home date with the Nashville Predators.
McDavid backhands it toward the empty net and scores! 1 second to play, and the Edmonton Oilers are on to round 2.
Down to 5. Fans on their feet here at Madison Square Garden. Petrie with one final shot. It misses the net. Henrik Lundqvist throws his arms up in the air. The Rangers win the game 3-1. The series 4-2. They move on to the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Broussard turns down to the corner. Centering pass. Scores! Clark MacArthur has won the series for Ottawa. He stings the Bees, wins the game, wins the series. Hello, New York.
Here's Williams. Right circle and drive. Rebound. They score! They score! Marcus Johansson wins it for Washington. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night, Toronto.
Good call there. Here's my thing, with Hockey Guy, Mike, and basically the genesis of that bit, right? Yesterday I tweeted, who would have thought Spurs-Grizzlies would have the game of the playoffs thus far? And Mike Zimmer's ears, who's generally a very nice fella, tweeted in, NHL playoffs get something exciting pretty much every night. Like, I feel like I don't understand, I never go out of my way to say anything negative about hockey, but Hockey Guy is always butting into other conversations to act as if you've never seen a hockey game, to tell you how great hockey is. That's what I don't get. It's like this insecurity or something.
Well, it is an insecurity because they feel that their sport is underrepresented in media coverage, and I can understand that to that end. Again, Hockey Guy is such a minority of the larger hockey fan base that I try not to get too caught up in it. But, yeah, listen, I saw your little back and forth. You're also super pro basketball guy, and we're slandering hockey behind closed doors here in the studio. So I can understand Hockey Guy hates having a gripe with you.
Producer Dan Z is Hockey Guy. So, if I can really I can prod him with my verbal hockey stick, I'm going to do that.
That is true. On the show, we no longer have Hockey Guy as a nameless gray face now. He has a face. He has a name. His name is Dan.
Sean Mispelli tweets in, dude, total disgrace. It took you an hour and 40 minutes to even bring up hockey today. Forget first and last. See, there's Hockey Guy in full effect. Right there.
Although, listen, Hockey Guy is going to get what he wants and what really I think a lot of the casual fans want coming up in the next round now that we've got that Pens Cap series, because you take two of the biggest and brightest stars in the sport, pair them up against each other, and that's easy to package and sell to the broader audience.
I have respect for the NHL and the game. It's quick, fast-moving contact game. Everybody gets that. It just doesn't happen to be my favorite. And no matter how much you tell me the NBA is predictable or whatever, and this goes for a lot of people, I mean, this goes for more people than not, both domestic and globally, they're not going to change their mind about it. It's not the first hockey game they've seen. Here's a question for you, though, because a lot of this is due to popularity. What's more popular, hockey or soccer?
Well, in America or worldwide?
In America.
I would say hockey still.
Are Mike and Mike going to talk about hockey to start the show?
Well, no, but they're going to talk. If they're going to talk about the show leading with a Messi goal, perhaps that's still soccer in the realm of the world where it is most popular. He's a compelling star. That being said, in the U.S., if you were to ask home-based fans here, I still think hockey would trump there. It's still one of the four majors, and soccer's still on the outside looking in.
I'd have to see some data. Is Sidney Crosby more famous than Lionel Messi or Ronaldo?
But again, those guys aren't playing in on this side of the globe, so I don't weight them the same. Soccer is the biggest sport in the entire planet. You could argue Messi and those guys are bigger stars than anyone in the NBA or the NHL
But no, in the
worldwide.
United States. I'm talking about in the United States. Messi, I would argue Messi and Ronaldo are probably more famous than Sidney Crosby in the United States. The MLS is not as popular as the NHL. I would never argue that, but everybody knows that's an inferior league. I'm talking about the sport of soccer versus the sport of hockey.
Yeah, I would probably still give hockey the edge here.
Thank you for listening to the First and Last podcast. You can listen and subscribe to all ESPN podcasts in the Listen tab of the ESPN app. First and Last.